topic where we're going to start focus on today is behavioral learning theories. And some of you, because of the classes situation, some of you might have already had some of this. Some of you haven't had some of this content. So as kind of a refresher, I'll start and with some of the information that you might have already had and work from there. Um, First things first is I like to always think about what kind of strategies teachers use often to uh, manage a classroom. What are their strategies? I read a scenario to some of you in a previous class where you're a new teacher, you've been teaching for a few weeks, you've got a really enthusiastic classroom. Say you're a junior high social studies teacher. You have a really enthusiastic group of kids, but their enthusiasm is getting the best of you, meaning that the classroom's kind of chaotic. And you have to think about, okay, I love their enthusiasm, but I need a little less chaos. So what do I need to do? All right. So say for instance that they're constantly blurting out answers, not raising their hand, and you're trying to kind of get the class to keep the enthusiasm, perhaps raising their hands a little bit more, develop a system. So when you start thinking about, like what am I going to do in my classroom? Well, you find out that a lot of very common strategies that teachers use that rely on kind of a behavioral approach is they'll reinforce those kids that raise their hand. So somebody raises their hand, they praise them. Perhaps in order to talk in the classroom, you have to have a particular object in your hand. Perhaps a teacher will have a set of sticks and they'll draw out each stick and then put it off to the side once they've called on you once in the class. Perhaps they'll give the students whiteboards. They'll write on their whiteboards, or perhaps they have some sort of electronic device, and then they can submit their answer, and then they'll get feedback from the teacher. But anyway, you see a lot of different systems that teachers use, and the focus is most of the time is I'm going to get them to be less chaotic, more organized by basically reinforcing the good behaviors and perhaps maybe even punishing the bad behaviors. That's a real behaviorist kind of approach to shaping or changing the classroom behavior. Now, there's other approaches, okay? And I used one in the class, one of the classes or two of the classes, where I asked each of you to think about if it's the last day of class, or I'm not the last day of class. Yay, summer! No, it's the last day of class, last day of on Earth, and you get to choose whatever it is that you want to eat, and you can eat as much as you want. We're going to focus on the dessert portion. When you think about the desserts that you would like to have, and you've got it in your head, okay? What you find is that if I asked each of you in the classroom using a teacher's voice to all blurt out your answer at the same time, and we were to do that, the net result is going to be, man, it is hard to hear what my neighbor is saying. I couldn't hear someone that was 2 feet away from me what they were saying because one, I was focused on what I wanted to say, and two, and it was so loud I couldn't hear anybody. Now, that, believe it or not, is a strategy to control the chaos in the classroom as well. The difference is I want students to experience it firsthand. I want to shape the way that they think about the process. I want to get into there when they experience that the loudness or the inability to focus because I wanted to say what I wanted to say. That's a very different approach than perhaps a behavioral approach. Okay, so and it makes sense if you're in a classroom. A lot of times, what do students want to do when they want to talk? They want to make sure everybody hears what they have to say, and they're so focused on what they want to say that they don't even hear what their neighbors are saying. The idea is there are different approaches to managing a classroom, but as teachers, man, we rely a lot on a behavioral approach, the use of reinforcement and punishment as a means to shape or change the behavior. Now, one of the things, you take a look at the first slide in the PowerPoint that I sent you a thing of the evolution of learning theories. And the only reason I sent you that is you can kind of see that when we start as teachers and in this classroom, we start taking a look at understanding how kids learn and what shapes or informs them, their learning habits, okay, their learning strategies. We're going to focus on three primary approaches to understanding learning. One is the role that the environment plays, all right, and that focuses primarily on a um, on a behavioral approach. Okay, the external environment. How does the environment shape the way that my students learn? And that's what we'll be talking about in these videos here. The second approach is what we would refer to as more of a social cognitive approach, or focusing on the teacher as a model, that students are learning through observation. Now, does the environment play a part there? Well, yeah, of course it does, because we're part of the environment. Teachers are, your classmates are. But you also have an internal component there because the students are picking up on characteristics of the models, things that the models do that might shape the way that we think or how we approach the learning task. And the third approach that we're going to take a look at is an information processing approach. With that approach, we're going to primarily focus on how do students internalize information? How do they mentally process information? Now think back to my example that I used with the chaotic classroom. The approaches that many students will come up with, many teachers will come up with, is very much a behaviorist approach, the environmentally based approach, which is they do something well, I reinforce it, they like it, they do it more often. They do something I don't like, perhaps I punish it, they'll stop doing that. So if I got a bunch of kids that are blurting out answers all the time, well, the threat of being in trouble might reduce that. Or the possibility of getting something in return for good behavior might increase better appropriate behaviors. Now, I try to take more of an information processing or an internalized approach, which was by the students thinking about what they would like to have as a favorite dessert, blurting it out, everybody's doing it at the same time. And when I ask them, why couldn't they hear their neighbor? They say it was too loud. And I go, aha. Now they start thinking about, when it gets really loud in the classroom, it's really difficult to hear. That's what the teacher's talking about. So that's kind of focused on an internal approach. All right. So we're going to go over the course of these videos in the class here. We're going to go over those three different approaches. Okay. So when you start talking about learning, what does it mean to learn? You're going to find that there's various definitions. And I always say that I think it's really important that you as a teacher understand, what does learning mean to you? You'll have college classrooms where teachers will scoff at the idea of using a multiple choice exam because they feel that that's focusing primarily on regurgitation, memorization. Well, there's some truth to that. No doubt about it. However, you'll find that some teachers think that, I've got to give them blue books and I got to give them essays because that's where I really get an understanding of, are they able to apply the information. Then take a look at a lot of the essays. Essays are things like this in a history class. Name the pivotal battle in the Civil War that led the North to victory, and three of the economic outcomes. Well, if you evaluate or assess the essay in that case, you're going to find that list the battle, identify the battle, list the three economic implications, list, identify. Those things are low-level descriptors, which are basically easily covered in multiple choice exams as well. So the idea is essays can get an application if they're written for application, and multiple choice tests can get at application-based stuff too. You just have to write good multiple choice questions. So the idea is you need to understand what learning means to you. How do you define learning? Because once you have an understanding of what learning looks like for you, you'll find that your assessment will follow. And you're going to probably have a mix of things that are low level and high level according to Bloom's taxonomy, etc. Right? So You'll notice in that PowerPoint slide, I talk about different definitions of learning. We're going to focus on two. One is where you see a relatively permanent change in behavior due to experience. And the second one is, which is more of a behaviorist approach. And the second is learning as a relatively permanent change in mental associations due to some experience. And that's much more of a social cognitive or an information processing approach. So I always like to say, when you think about it, behaviorists are from Missouri, because Missouri is the show me state. That means I believe learning's taking place when I see it. Show me. That means I need to see a change in behavior. Don't tell me you know. Show me you know. Okay. So the behaviorist approach is relying heavily on show me that you've learned something, whereas the information processing approach, the more internalized approach, might be like, wait a minute. Yeah, learning can take place. Sometimes they don't have an opportunity to show you. Sometimes their thinking has changed and they haven't had an opportunity to show you through their behavior, but they have learned. Okay, and we'll talk about that in later videos. All right. So one of the things that you'll notice, and the book talks about this stuff as well, is there's some basic assumptions behind behaviors. Okay. The first is that behavior is largely a result of your environment. We act in accordance with, in sync with our environment. We get reinforced. We do it more often. We get punished. We do it less often. They also believe that learning should be observable, meaning there should be a stimulus and a response. Okay. Learning should be observable. That means I need to be able to see what did I do and what was the response in accordance with that stimulus. You'll find that much of what we do in instructional design and in our classrooms when we're developing lesson plans are very much focused on a behaviorist approach. When you write a set of objectives, behavioral objectives, first things first is they need to be measurable. I need to be able to have an outcome that I can measure if I know learning takes place. That stems from a behaviorist approach, developing those learning objectives. I need to write something that is specific, that is measurable, that I know learning took place. Here's our objectives, or our goals, or standards like that. That's what we're looking for. Third is learning involves a change in behavior. And I'm going to show you here in a second in the second series or second video about how that is really important for us as teachers. And lastly is that learning occurs when certain events occur in conjunction with each other. That's that basic principle of contiguity. All that means is learning took place as a result of two things being paired at more or less the same time. And a behavior was learned from that pairing. And we'll talk about that here in just a second as well. So let's focus on, I'm going to focus on this idea of learning involves a change in behavior. And I only can do less than 15-minute clips, so I'm going to save that to our second clip.